My son told me he didn't have time to listen to me anymore. The words still echo in my chest like a funeral bell that won't stop ringing. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even 1 second, feel like this sounds familiar, please just leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to open these old wounds. My name is Margaret, though most people just call me Maggie now. I'm 78 years old, and I live in a 3-bedroom house in Portland, Oregon. The same house where I raised 2 children, hosted 37 Christmas dinners, and held my husband George's hand as cancer slowly stole him from me 3 years ago. The morning light still filters through the same lace curtains I hung in 1987, casting familiar shadows across hardwood floors that creak with the weight of decades of memories. Every morning, I wake up at 6:30 a.m. sharp, a habit George and I developed during 43 years of marriage. The coffee maker still gurgles to life automatically, filling 2 cups out of muscle memory before I remember I only need one now. The kitchen table, scarred from countless family meals and homework sessions, holds my morning ritual. Lukewarm coffee, yesterday's newspaper, and a silence so complete it feels like drowning in plain sight. I used to think retirement would be golden. I imagined grandchildren running through these halls, my children visiting for Sunday dinners, phone calls that lasted longer than requests for money or favors. Instead, I've become a ghost haunting my own life, invisible except when someone needs something from me. That Tuesday morning started like every other, with disappointment dressed up as routine. My arthritis was acting up again, making my fingers stiff as I tried to button my sweater. The blue one with tiny roses that George always said brought out my eyes. I still wear it sometimes, hoping maybe someone will notice the way he used to. But these days, people look through me like I'm made of glass. I was arranging fresh flowers, white lilies from my garden, when my phone buzzed with a text from my son Wesley. Not a call. Never a call anymore. Just 5 words that would crack something deep inside my chest. Too busy today. Maybe next week. I stared at those words until they blurred together. Too busy. Always too busy. Wesley used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him, begging me to read just one more story, sing just one more lullaby. Now, at 45, he couldn't spare 30 minutes for the woman who spent 30 years putting his needs before her own breath. The text was in response to my invitation, my carefully worded, hopeful invitation to have lunch together. Just the 2 of us. No agenda, no crisis to solve, no money to lend. Just a mother wanting to hear about her son's life, to see his face without the distracted expression he wore whenever I tried to have real conversations. I set the phone down with trembling hands and walked to my living room, where dozens of framed photographs lined the mantelpiece like a shrine to a family that used to exist. Wesley's graduation from college, his wedding to Thelma, the birth of their twins, Emma and Jake. In every photo, I'm there, smiling, proud, arms wrapped around the people I love most in this world. But when I look at these pictures now, I see something different. I see a woman who was already starting to fade, even in moments of celebration. There's one photo that always stops me. It was taken last Christmas, the only time my entire family gathered in this house anymore. Wesley is looking at his phone. Thelma is checking hers. The twins, now 14, are absorbed in their devices. And there I am, in the center of the frame, holding a perfectly prepared turkey, my face glowing with the hope that this time would be different. This time, they'd stay longer than an hour. This time, someone would ask how I was feeling, if I was lonely, if I needed anything more than what money could buy. But they left before dessert. Early flight tomorrow, Wesley had said, already reaching for his coat. You understand, Mom. I always understood. I understood when he was too busy for my birthday dinner. I understood when Thelma stopped inviting me to the twins' school events. I understood when my calls went straight to voicemail and stayed there for days. I understood myself into invisibility, into a corner of my own life where I waited patiently for crumbs of attention from people I'd given everything to. The house felt especially quiet that Tuesday afternoon. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Chen next door playing with her grandchildren in the backyard, their laughter floating through my kitchen window like music I'd forgotten existed. She was probably their age when I was Wesley's whole world, when he'd wrap his tiny arms around my neck and whisper, "You're the best mama in the whole wide world." Now I'm just mom in his contacts, a duty to check off his endless list of responsibilities. I made myself a cup of tea, Earl Grey with 1 sugar, the way George taught me to drink it, and sat in his old chair. The leather still smells faintly of his aftershave, and sometimes, if I close my eyes, I can almost pretend he's just in the next room, reading his newspaper and mumbling about politicians who don't know what they're doing. "What would you do, George?" I whispered to the empty room. "What would you do if the children we raised, the children we sacrificed everything for, treated you like a burden they're too polite to abandon completely?" But George wasn't there to answer. George wouldn't be there to hold my hand when I finally admitted the truth that had been growing like a tumor in my chest for 3 years. I was being erased from my own family's story, one canceled lunch at a time. That evening, as I sat with my untouched dinner growing cold, the memories came flooding back like a dam had burst in my mind. I found myself thinking about all the times I'd said yes when my heart was screaming no. All the times I'd emptied my savings account, my energy, my soul, believing that love meant never having boundaries. It started when Wesley was in college. He called me crying one night, his sophomore year at Oregon State. "Mom, I messed up. I spent my tuition money on. I can't even tell you how stupid I was. They're going to kick me out if I don't pay by Friday." I remember standing in my kitchen at 11 p.m., still in my work uniform from the diner where I'd been picking up extra shifts to help pay for his education. George was already asleep, exhausted from his double shift at the lumber mill. We were barely making ends meet, but Wesley was my baby, my first baby. I couldn't let him fail. I cleaned out our emergency fund, $3,000 we'd saved over 2 years by skipping dinners out, wearing clothes until they fell apart, driving our old Ford until it wheezed like an asthmatic. $3,000 that was supposed to fix our leaking roof before winter. That year, we caught rainwater in buckets scattered around our bedroom, but Wesley graduated on time. He never asked what that money cost us, never asked how we managed without it. When he graduated, I was so proud I cried through the entire ceremony. He found me afterward and hugged me tight. "Mom, I'm going to pay you back everything. I promise. Once I get established, I'm going to take care of you and Dad the way you took care of me." That was 26 years ago. I'm still waiting for that promise to ripen. Then came his wedding to Thelma. They wanted something memorable, they said. Something their friends would talk about for years. The venue they chose cost $18,000. More money than George and I had ever seen in one place. "We can't ask Thelma's parents," Wesley explained during one of his visits. "Her dad's business is struggling and her mom's been sick. But Mom, this wedding, it's not just about us. It's about starting our life right, you know? Setting the foundation for everything we want to build together." He painted such a beautiful picture. "Love deserved celebration," he said. "Family deserved investment. And wasn't I family? Wasn't I invested in his happiness?" George and I mortgaged our house, the house we'd finally paid off after 25 years of scrimping and saving. We took out a second mortgage to pay for their wedding, their honeymoon in Hawaii, their first apartment's deposit. I spent months clipping coupons with arthritic fingers, buying generic everything, mending clothes instead of replacing them. But when I saw Wesley dancing with Thelma under those twinkling lights, her dress flowing like something from a fairy tale, I thought, this is what love looks like. This is what sacrifice builds. Thelma never thanked me, not once. She thanked her parents for understanding their financial limitations. She thanked Wesley for working so hard to make their dream wedding happen. But the woman who'd given up her financial security, who'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner for 6 months so they could have champagne and caviar, I was invisible even in my generosity. The babies came 2 years later. Twins, Emma and Jake. I fell in love with them the moment I held their tiny, perfect bodies. They smelled like powder and possibility, and when they wrapped their little fingers around mine, I felt purposeful again, needed again. "Mom, we're drowning," Thelma had said, bouncing a crying Emma while Jake wailed in his crib. "Daycare costs more than my salary. We can't afford to live if I keep working, but we can't afford for me to quit." The solution seemed obvious. I was recently retired, healthy enough to help, and madly in love with my grandchildren. I'll watch them, I offered. Every day, whenever you need. Free of charge, their family. For 2 years, I was a full-time grandmother. I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare bottles, changed hundreds of diapers, walked miles around my living room at 3 a.m. bouncing colicky babies. I taught them their first words, celebrated their first steps, kissed away tears from scraped knees. Wesley and Thelma saved $48,000 in childcare costs during those 2 years. $48,000 that allowed them to buy a bigger house, take weekend trips to the coast, invest in Thelma's small business dreams. I never asked for payment, never asked for recognition, never even asked for a day off when I had the flu so bad I could barely stand. Because this was what grandmothers did, right? This was love in action. But when the twins started kindergarten and my daily purpose evaporated, neither Wesley nor Thelma seemed to notice the sudden emptiness in my life. They were busy with their careers, their social circles, their new normal that no longer included a grandmother who'd restructured her entire existence around their needs. The calls became less frequent. The visits grew shorter. When I mentioned feeling lonely, Thelma would say, "Mom, you should get a hobby. Maybe join a book club or something." A hobby. As if the woman who'd raised their children, managed their household during emergencies, sacrificed her retirement savings for their down payment, needed a hobby to feel valuable. Then came the real estate market boom 5 years ago. Wesley called me, excited, talking fast the way he did when he had big plans. "Mom, your house is worth a fortune now. Have you thought about downsizing? Maybe moving into one of those nice senior communities?" What he didn't say, but what hung in the air like smoke, was that my house, the house George and I had built, where Wesley learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I'd hosted every family holiday for 30 years, was now seen as an asset to be liquidated rather than a home to be treasured. "You could sell this place, buy something smaller, and have money left over to really enjoy your retirement," he continued. "Travel, see the world. You deserve that, Mom." But when I mentioned maybe using some of that hypothetical money to finally take the trip to Ireland, George and I had always planned, Wesley's tone shifted. "Well, let's be practical about this. The twins are going to need college funds, and Thelma's business could really expand with the right investment. Practical. Always practical when it came to my money, my sacrifice, my diminished dreams. I never sold the house. Partly because I couldn't bear to leave the place where George's presence still lingered in every room, but mostly because I finally understood what was really being asked of me: to liquidate my life's work so my adult children could live more comfortably while I faded quietly into some sterile apartment where I'd be safely out of the way. Last year, when George's medical bills from his final months came due, I asked Wesley for help. Not money. I would never ask him for money after everything I'd given. Just company. Someone to sit with me while I sorted through insurance papers and called billing departments and tried to navigate a healthcare system designed to confuse and exhaust elderly people into giving up. "Mom, I wish I could, but work is crazy right now. Why don't you call that nice woman at the senior center? Isn't helping with this stuff exactly what those services are for?" Those services. As if my son's love could be outsourced to strangers paid to care about problems he found too tedious to address. I handled George's final bills alone. Thousands of dollars in debt that ate through what little savings we had left. I sold my engagement ring, the ring George had saved for 6 months to buy, working overtime at the mill until his hands bled, to pay for his funeral expenses. Wesley never knew about the ring, never asked how I managed to give his father the dignified goodbye he deserved, never wondered why the simple gold band suddenly looked naked on my finger. As I sat in that quiet house, staring at my cold dinner, I finally asked myself the question that had been lurking in the shadows of my mind for years. Was I used? The word felt ugly in my mouth, like something I shouldn't think about the people I loved most. But love was supposed to be reciprocal, wasn't it? Love was supposed to notice when someone was drowning in their own generosity. I looked around my living room, at the piano I'd bought for the twins' lessons that ended after 3 months, at the photo albums filled with memories of a family that seemed to exist only in pictures now, at the silence that had become my most faithful companion. And for the first time in my 78 years, I wondered, What would happen if I stopped saying yes? The question haunted me through a sleepless night. Was I used? But it was the small cruelties, the everyday dismissals, that truly broke something inside me over the following weeks. The kind of casual neglect that cuts deeper than any dramatic confrontation ever could. My 78th birthday came and went like a whisper in an empty room. I woke up that morning with a flutter of hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe Wesley would remember without Facebook reminding him. Maybe Thelma would call early, like she used to when the twins were small and needed me every day. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one with tiny pearls that George had bought me for our 40th anniversary. I even did my hair, curling it the way he always liked. I baked myself a small chocolate cake, the same recipe I'd used for every birthday celebration in this house for the past 3 decades. By noon, my phone hadn't made a sound. By 3 o'clock, I was staring at that cake like it was evidence of my own foolishness. Who bakes their own birthday cake and expects anyone to care? At 4:47 p.m., my phone finally buzzed. A text from Wesley. "Sorry, forgot it was your birthday. Work has been insane. We'll make it up to you soon. Love you." Forgot. He forgot. The woman who never forgot a single milestone in his life, his first tooth, his first day of school, every birthday, every achievement, every heartbreak, had become so forgettable that her own birth warranted nothing more than a hastily typed apology. Thelma's message came 2 hours later. "Happy belated birthday, Mom. Hope you had a wonderful day. Belated." As if my birthday was something that happened to other people. Something she'd eventually get around to acknowledging when more important things stopped demanding her attention. The twins didn't call at all. 14 years old enough to remember the grandmother who'd raised them for the first 2 years of their lives, who'd attended every school play and soccer game until she was quietly uninvited from their activities. But I was competing with social media, video games, and teenage dramas that mattered more than an old woman's feelings. I ate one slice of chocolate cake standing in my kitchen, tears mixing with frosting as I watched the sun set on another year of my life that nobody had thought worth celebrating. 2 weeks later, I caught a flu that knocked me flat for days. Fever, chills, a cough that felt like broken glass in my chest. I was too weak to drive to the doctor, too dizzy to stand for more than a few minutes. I called Wesley, hoping maybe he could take a few hours off work to drive me to urgent care. "Mom, I really can't today. Big presentation tomorrow. Can't you call an Uber? Or maybe ask Mrs. Chen next door." An Uber. He suggested I trust my health to a stranger rather than inconvenience his schedule. Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, was 82 and hadn't driven in 2 years. But Wesley didn't know that because he hadn't visited my neighborhood, hadn't checked on my support system, hadn't wondered how a 78-year-old woman managed emergencies on her own. I spent 3 days on my couch, surviving on crackers and lukewarm tea, watching daytime television and wondering what would happen if I just disappeared. How long would it take for someone to notice? A week? A month? Would they find me when the bills went unpaid? Or would I become one of those tragic news stories about elderly people dying alone while their families were too busy to care? But it was the discovery I made while cleaning out George's old desk that finally shattered the last of my illusions about what I meant to my family. I'd been putting off going through his papers for 3 years. Every time I opened that desk drawer, the smell of his cologne mixed with old paper threatened to drown me in grief. But the tax season was approaching, and I needed to find some documents our accountant had requested. Hidden in the back of the bottom drawer, behind files of old insurance policies and warranties for appliances we'd replaced years ago, I found a folder I'd never seen before. Inside were bank statements for an account I didn't know existed, an account in Wesley's name that George had been contributing to for 15 years. 15 years. $200 a month, every month, taken from our modest retirement savings and quietly transferred to our son without my knowledge. George had been systematically giving Wesley money we could have used for the roof repairs we'd delayed, for the medical treatments we'd skipped because of cost, for the tiny luxuries that might have made our final years together more comfortable. The statements told a story I wasn't prepared to read. Regular deposits from George's pension, followed by quick withdrawals on Wesley's end. The timing of those withdrawals aligned perfectly with purchases I remembered. Wesley's new truck, the family vacation to Disney World, Thelma's business equipment, the twins' private music lessons. $24,000. Over 15 years, George had given our son $24,000 that I knew nothing about. Money that came from his mouth staying silent when I suggested we finally replace our ancient refrigerator. Money that came from him wearing the same 3 shirts for 2 years because they still have life in them. Money that came from us eating pasta and canned sauce for dinner more nights than I could count, while our son was buying organic groceries and craft beer. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note from George to Wesley. "Son, your mother doesn't know about these transfers. She worries too much about money, and I don't want her to feel guilty about helping you get ahead. Just promise me you'll take care of her when I'm gone. She's sacrificed more than you know." I sat on the floor of George's study, holding that note with shaking hands, understanding finally that even my husband, the man who'd loved me more than life itself, had seen me as someone who needed to be managed rather than consulted. Someone whose financial input wasn't valuable enough to include in decisions about our own money. But worse than George's secret generosity was what it revealed about Wesley's character. For 15 years, he'd accepted money from his aging father while watching us struggle. He'd taken our sacrifices while letting us believe we were barely getting by on our own. He'd smiled and hugged us at family gatherings, knowing he had access to resources we were denying ourselves. And after George died, after his final wish that Wesley take care of me, what had I received? Phone calls asking for favors, suggestions that I downsize my life to fund their upgrades, a son who was too busy for lunch, too important for birthdays, too sophisticated for the woman who'd given him everything. I called the bank that afternoon. The account was still active. Wesley had been making withdrawals as recently as last month. $2,000 that coincided perfectly with Thelma's Instagram posts about their anniversary trip to wine country. They were still spending George's money, still benefiting from his secret generosity, still living off the sacrifices of parents they couldn't be bothered to visit. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since George's funeral. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in his chair, holding that folder like evidence in a trial where I was both prosecutor and victim. I thought about all the times Wesley had let me struggle with problems he could have helped solve with the money he was quietly receiving from his father. All the times I'd worried about finances while he was buying luxuries funded by our retirement savings. All the times I'd felt guilty for needing help when he had resources he'd never offered to share. I looked around my living room, at the patched carpet we'd never replaced, the faded wallpaper we'd promised to update someday, the furniture that was older than Wesley's marriage, and I finally understood what I'd been to my family all these years. Not a mother, not a person with needs and feelings and dignity. I was a resource to be managed, a bank account with legs, a convenient source of labor and love and money that never seemed to run dry, no matter how much they withdrew. The tears came then, hot and angry and 3 years overdue, but they weren't just tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of rage at my own blindness, my own willingness to be diminished, my own failure to see what was happening to me until it was almost too late. I set down the wine glass and walked to my bedroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, thin, tired, forgotten. When had I become so small? When had I learned to make myself invisible to avoid inconveniencing the people who should have cherished me? For the first time in my life, I was angry enough to do something about it. And tomorrow, I decided, was going to be different. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before in my 78 years. I said no. Wesley called at 7:30 a.m., his voice carrying that familiar edge of barely controlled panic that I'd learned to recognize as my cue to drop everything and solve his problems. "Mom, thank God you're awake. Listen, we have a crisis. Thelma's mother fell and broke her hip, and we need to fly to Sacramento immediately. Can you watch the twins for the weekend?" I know it's short notice, but no. The word came out so quietly, I wasn't sure he'd heard it. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "What do you mean, no?" "Mom, this is an emergency. Thelma's crying, the twins need supervision, and there's nobody else who can—" I said no, Wesley. This time, my voice was stronger, clearer. It surprised even me. "I don't understand. Why can't you help us? Are you sick? Do you have other plans?" "Other plans?" As if a woman who'd been forgotten on her own birthday might have developed a social calendar that mattered more than his convenience. I have plans to not be taken advantage of anymore. Another silence. I could hear Thelma's voice in the background, shrill and demanding. What's she saying? Why is she being difficult? Difficult. I was being difficult for refusing to drop my life to accommodate theirs on 12 hours' notice. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't the time for whatever this is. We'll talk about it when we get back. He hung up before I could respond. In 45 years of being Wesley's mother, he had never hung up on me. But then again, I'd never refused him anything before either. 20 minutes later, Thelma called. Her voice was sugar-sweet, the tone she used when she needed something but didn't want to admit it. Mom, Wesley says you're not feeling well. I thought maybe I could swing by with some soup before we leave for the airport. We could chat about this weekend. I'm feeling perfectly fine, Thelma. I'm just not available to babysit. Not available? Her voice cracked like ice. Mom, I don't understand. You love spending time with Emma and Jake. You always say they're the light of your life. They were. God help me. Those children were the light of my life. But I was tired of my love being weaponized against me. Tired of my devotion being the lever my family used to move me wherever they needed me to be. I do love them, which is why I've spent thousands of hours caring for them without ever asking for anything in return. But I'm not a daycare service you can call when your regular arrangements fall through. I can't believe you're being this selfish. Thelma's mother could be dying and you're worried about, what? Your feelings? Selfish. There it was. The word I'd been conditioned to fear my entire life. The weapon that had kept me compliant, accommodating, invisible. But for the first time, it didn't have the power to wound me. If wanting to be treated with basic respect was selfish, then maybe it was time I learned how to be selfish. Find other arrangements, Thelma. You have friends, neighbors, paid babysitters. Use them. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From something that felt like freedom. Within an hour, Emma called. Sweet, 14-year-old Emma with her father's eyes and her grandmother's stubborn chin. Grandma Maggie? Mom says you don't want to see us this weekend. My heart clenched. Of all the manipulation tactics my family could employ, using the twins was the cruelest and most effective. Oh, sweetheart, that's not true. I always want to see you. But your parents called me this morning expecting me to drop everything to babysit, and I told them I couldn't do that anymore. But Grandma, you love having us over. Remember last month when you taught me how to make your chocolate chip cookies? And you promised Jake you'd help him with his science project. The tears came then, hot and bitter. Because Emma was right. I did love having them over. I lived for their visits, their laughter, their arms around my neck when they hugged me goodbye. But even my grandchildren had learned to see me as a service provider rather than a person with needs and boundaries. Emma, honey, listen to me. I love you and your brother more than anything in this world, but I'm not your parents' employee. I'm your grandmother, and I deserve to be asked, not commanded. I deserve to have my time respected, not assumed. I don't understand why you're being mean to Mom and Dad. Mean. A 78-year-old woman asking for basic courtesy was being mean. Sometimes, sweetheart, standing up for yourself looks mean to people who are used to you saying yes to everything. But I promise you, this doesn't change how much I love you. After I hung up, I sat in George's chair and cried until my chest ached. Because loving someone shouldn't hurt this much. Because being a grandmother shouldn't require me to erase myself completely. Because setting boundaries shouldn't feel like I was abandoning the people I'd die for. But the calls didn't stop. Jake called an hour later, his voice small and confused. Grandma, did we do something wrong? Mom says you don't want to help our family anymore. Wesley called again at noon, his tone shifting from frustrated to concerned. Mom, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. Maybe you should see a doctor. Sometimes older people go through changes that affect their judgment. Changes that affect their judgment. He was questioning my mental capacity because I'd refused to babysit on demand. Thelma called again at 2 o'clock, her voice now cold and calculated. I hope you know you're ruining our family. My mother might be seriously injured, and instead of helping, you're having some kind of breakdown. I never thought I'd see the day when Wesley's own mother would abandon him in a crisis. abandoning him. 50 years of never saying no, and one refusal was abandonment. But it was Wesley's final call that night that showed me exactly what I was dealing with. Mom, I've been thinking about this all day, and I'm concerned about your mental state. Maybe it's time we talked about arrangements. You're getting older, living alone in that big house. Maybe it would be better if you were somewhere with people who could keep an eye on you. Arrangements. Somewhere with people to keep an eye on me. He was threatening to put me in a nursing home because I'd said no to babysitting. Are you suggesting I'm incompetent, Wesley? I'm suggesting you're not thinking clearly. The mother I know would never leave her family hanging like this. The mother I know would do anything for her grandchildren. The mother you know, I said slowly, was a doormat. She was a woman so afraid of being unloved that she let herself be used until there was nothing left of her but obligation and exhaustion. That's not... I found your father's bank records, Wesley. Silence. I know about the money. 15 years of secret payments. $24,000 that came from our retirement savings while we patched our roof with duct tape and ate rice and beans for dinner. Mom, I can explain. You took money from your father every month while watching me worry about grocery bills. You accepted his sacrifices while letting me believe we could barely afford to live. And you never once offered to help when I needed it, because you were too busy spending what he gave you. That money was... Dad wanted to help. It wasn't your decision to make. It was our money, Wesley. Our retirement savings. Our marriage. And you let him hide it from me because it was easier than asking honestly for what you needed. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up again. So what now, Mom? You're going to punish us for something Dad did? I'm not punishing anyone. I'm finally asking myself what I want, instead of what everyone else needs from me. And what do you want? For the first time in years, I had an answer. I want to matter to my family when it's not convenient. I want to be invited, not commanded. I want my time to be valued, not assumed. I want to be treated like a person with feelings, not a resource to be managed. Mom? And if that's too much to ask, then maybe you need to figure out what kind of people you've become. I hung up. Outside my window, Mrs. Chen was teaching her granddaughter to ride a bicycle, running alongside the wobbling bike with her arms outstretched, ready to catch her if she fell. The little girl was laughing, fearless, trusting that her grandmother would be there to keep her safe. That used to be me. That used to be the grandmother I was to Emma and Jake, before I became the grandmother who was expected to be available, invisible, endlessly giving without ever receiving. I closed my eyes and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. Tomorrow I was going to start living for Margaret instead of through Margaret. And if my family couldn't accept that version of me, then maybe it was time to find out who I was without them. The morning after I hung up on Wesley, I woke up at 6:30 a.m. as always, but something felt different. The silence in my house wasn't heavy with loneliness anymore. It was spacious with possibility. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't automatically reach for my phone to check if anyone needed anything from me. Instead, I made my coffee. Just 1 cup. Exactly how I liked it. And sat in my kitchen watching the sunrise paint my garden gold. When was the last time I'd noticed a sunrise? When was the last time I'd done anything simply because it brought me joy? That Saturday, I did something I hadn't done in over 20 years. I went shopping for myself. Not grocery shopping for family dinners that nobody came to eat. Not shopping for birthday gifts for people who forgot mine. Not buying supplies for grandchildren's projects or ingredients for meals I'd cook and freeze for busy children who couldn't be bothered to visit. I drove to that little boutique downtown, the one I'd passed 1,000 times while rushing to accomplish errands for everyone else. Vintage Rose, with its window display of elegant scarves and jewelry that always caught my eye, but never seemed worth stopping for. The owner, a woman about my age with silver hair styled in a way that looked effortlessly chic, greeted me with genuine warmth. "I'm Catherine," she said. "I don't think I've seen you in here before. I'm Margaret. And no, I don't usually shop for myself." She didn't ask why. Something in her eyes suggested she understood perfectly. "Well then," Catherine said with a smile that reached her eyes, "today seems like the perfect day to start." I tried on clothes I would never have considered before. A coral sweater that brought out the color in my cheeks. A pair of earrings that caught the light when I moved my head. a scarf so soft it felt like wearing a cloud. For 40 minutes, I stood in front of a three-way mirror and saw myself as something other than Wesley's mother, or the twins' grandmother, or George's widow. I saw Margaret. Just Margaret. A woman with silver hair and laugh lines and eyes that sparkled when she wore the right color. I bought the sweater, the earrings, and the scarf. $147. More than I'd spent on myself at one time in years. As Catherine wrapped my purchases in tissue paper, she said something that made my throat tight with unexpected emotion. "You have beautiful eyes. That coral really makes them shine. Beautiful eyes." When was the last time someone had called any part of me beautiful? From the boutique, I walked to the small cafe next door, Luna's Kitchen, where I'd never eaten despite driving past it hundreds of times. I ordered something I'd never tried before, lavender honey cake with Earl Grey tea. I sat by the window, watching people walk by with their weekend errands and family obligations, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Contentment with my own company. The cake was heavenly, the tea was perfect, and nobody needed anything from me while I sat there savoring both. On Sunday, I called the bank and did something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I closed the joint savings account that Wesley still had access to, the account that held the remainder of my and George's life savings. "I need to open a new account," I told the banker, a kind young woman named Sarah who treated me with the respect of someone whose business mattered, one that only I have access to. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. Would you like to transfer the full balance?" The full balance. $32,000 that represented everything George and I had saved after Wesley's secret withdrawals, after medical bills, after a lifetime of putting everyone else's needs first. Money that my son assumed would always be available when he needed it, just like his mother had always been available. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "All of it." As Sarah processed the paperwork, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not the heavy settling of resignation I'd grown accustomed to, but something lighter. Something that felt like hope taking up residence where guilt and obligation had lived for so long. That afternoon, I did something even more radical. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, and asked if she'd like to have tea together. "Margaret," she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "I was just thinking about you. I haven't seen you working in your garden lately. I've been figuring some things out." 20 minutes later, she was sitting in my living room, admiring the coral sweater I was wearing for the second time in 2 days. "You look wonderful," she said. "Different somehow. Lighter." We talked for 2 hours. About her grandchildren, yes, but also about her late husband, her arthritis, her fear of becoming a burden to her children, her love of old movies and the mystery novels she borrowed from the library every week. When was the last time I'd had a conversation about something other than my family's problems and needs? "You know," Mrs. Chen said as she prepared to leave, "I've been wanting to invite you to my book club for months, but you always seemed so busy with family obligations." A book club. When was the last time I'd read something for pleasure instead of researching solutions to other people's problems? "I'd love to join," I said, and meant it. Monday morning brought the inevitable phone call from Wesley. His voice was different now, cautious, calculating, like he was talking to a stranger who might be dangerous. "Mom, I tried to access the savings account this morning to transfer money for Emma's orthodontist appointment, and the bank said the account was closed." "That's correct." "What do you mean that's correct? Where's the money?" "In an account that only I have access to." Silence. Then, "Mom, that's our emergency fund, family money. You can't just—" "It's my money, Wesley. Mine and your father's. Money that we saved from our paychecks, our pensions, our sacrifices. Money that you've been quietly spending for years without asking. I never spent. Emma's orthodontics are not my financial responsibility. They're yours. You're her father. You have a job, a house, resources I helped you acquire. Figure it out. I can't believe you're doing this. What if something happens? What if one of the kids gets hurt and we need— Then you'll handle it the way every other parent does. With your own money, your own insurance, your own responsibility." Another silence. Then, his voice shifting to the pleading tone that had worked on me for 45 years. "Mom, please, I know you're upset about something, but this is going too far. We're family. Family helps each other. You're right, Wesley. Family does help each other. But for the past 20 years, the help has only flowed in one direction. You've helped yourself to my money, my time, my energy, my emotional labor. But when have you helped me? We've always been there for you. Name one time. One time in the past 5 years when you did something for me that I didn't have to ask for. One time when you noticed I needed help and offered it without being requested. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up again. Mom, I think you should talk to someone. A counselor or someone who can help you work through whatever this is. I'm working through it just fine on my own. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off for 3 years. I went through George's closet and donated his clothes to charity. Not because I was ready to let go of his memory, but because I was ready to stop shrine-keeping his absence. I kept one shirt, the blue flannel he wore on lazy Sunday mornings, and a sweater that still held the faint scent of his cologne. But the rest, the suits and ties and shoes that had been gathering dust while I pretended keeping them meant keeping him, went to the men's shelter downtown where they could serve someone who needed them. As I folded each item, I talked to George like he was still there beside me. I found out about the money, I said, smoothing a tie he'd worn to Wesley's wedding. I know you thought you were protecting me, but keeping secrets isn't protection. It's just another way of making decisions for someone instead of with them. I held up the blue flannel shirt, pressing it to my cheek. But I also know you loved me. I know you wanted Wesley to take care of me. And maybe he would have, if you'd asked him directly instead of just giving him money and hoping he'd figure out the rest. The last item in the closet was George's favorite cardigan, gray wool with patches on the elbows that I'd sewn on years ago when he refused to throw it away. I put it on over my new coral sweater, and somehow, wearing both my old life and my new one at the same time, I felt complete. That night, I slept through the entire night for the first time since George died. No waking up at 3 a.m., worrying about money or family drama, or whether I was being a good enough mother and grandmother. No lying awake wondering what else I could give, what else I could sacrifice, what else I could do to make people love me the way I loved them. I woke up the next morning feeling something I'd almost forgotten existed, peace. And for the first time in my 78 years, I woke up curious about what I wanted to do with my day, instead of dreading what others would need from me. The woman in my bedroom mirror looked familiar now, not the ghost I'd been seeing for months, but the person I'd been before I learned to make myself small enough to fit into other people's convenience. I was still Margaret Henderson, still Wesley's mother and Emma and Jake's grandmother, still George's widow, but I was also something I'd never been before, free. 3 weeks into my new life, Wesley decided to stage an intervention. He called on a Thursday evening, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness he used when he was about to ambush me with something unpleasant. "Hey, Mom, how about we all get together this Saturday? Family dinner at your place, like old times. Thelma's making her famous potato salad, and the twins have been asking about you." I almost laughed. After months of being too busy for a simple lunch, suddenly they wanted family dinner. After being excluded from their anniversary celebration, now they were ready to grace me with their presence. "I'm sorry, Wesley, but I have other plans on Saturday." "Other plans?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "What other plans?" "I'm going to the coast with my book club. We're visiting some art galleries in Cannon Beach." This was true. Mrs. Chen had invited me to join 6 women from her reading group for a day trip, and I'd said yes without the guilty flutter that usually accompanied any decision that prioritized my happiness over my family's convenience. "You joined a book club?" He said it like I'd announced I was running away to join the circus. "I did. We're reading The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo this month. It's fascinating. A story about a woman who finally learns to live life on her own terms. Mom, we need to talk. All of us. As a family. This phase you're going through? It's affecting everyone." Phase. As if setting boundaries and reclaiming my dignity was something I'd grow out of like a teenager's rebellion. "What I'm going through, Wesley, is called self-respect. And it's not a phase. It's permanent." Saturday came and went beautifully. The book club women, Patricia, Joan, Susan, Mary, Diane, and Mrs. Chen, treated me like a person worth knowing. We discussed books and art, shared stories about our late husbands, laughed about our children's quirks without anyone suggesting we existed solely to serve them. Patricia, a retired teacher, told me I had intelligent insights about character development. Joan, whose husband had also died recently, understood the strange liberation that comes with profound loss. For 8 hours, I was just Margaret, not Wesley's mother or anyone's grandmother or a widow defined by absence. Just a woman with opinions and humor and intelligence that other people valued. When I returned home that evening, refreshed and genuinely happy, I found Wesley's car in my driveway. He was sitting on my front porch with Thelma, both of them wearing the grim expressions of people preparing to deliver difficult news to someone they considered incapable of handling it alone. "We need to talk," Wesley said, standing as I approached. "All of us. Together." "About what?" "About what you're doing to this family." I unlocked my front door and invited them in. Not because I owed them anything, but because I was curious to see how far they'd push this charade of concern. Thelma immediately began studying my living room like a crime scene investigator. "You redecorated," she said, her tone suggesting this was evidence of mental instability. I had redecorated, in small ways. George's chair was still there, but I'd added colorful throw pillows. I'd hung new artwork, prints I'd bought at a gallery instead of the family photos that had dominated every surface. I'd moved the furniture to face the window instead of the television, because I preferred watching birds to watching news that made me anxious. I made some changes, yes. It looks different. It looks like someone lives here, instead of just existing here. Wesley sat heavily on the couch, his face carrying the weight of someone about to perform an unpleasant duty. "Mom, we're worried about you. Really worried." "About what, specifically?" "You're acting erratic. Closing bank accounts, refusing to help family, spending money on frivolous things." His eyes lingered on my coral sweater, the one that made my eyes shine. "Frivolous things like clothes that fit and make me feel good about myself? That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Thelma jumped in, her voice honeyed with false concern. "Margaret, we love you. We want what's best for you. But this isolation, this anger toward your family, it's not healthy. Isolation. I'd never been less isolated in my life. I'm not isolated. I have friends now. Real friends who enjoy my company without needing anything from me." "But we're your family," Wesley said, his voice rising. "We should come first." "Why?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Wesley blinked, clearly expecting a different response. "What do you mean, why? I mean, why should you come first? What have you done to earn that priority? When have you put me first? You're my mother, and you're my son. But for the past 20 years, that relationship has been entirely one-sided. I give, you take. I accommodate, you demand. I sacrifice, you benefit. That's not true." I walked to my desk and pulled out the folder containing George's bank statements. "This says otherwise." Wesley's face went pale. "Mom, let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you took money from your dying father every month while watching me worry about bills? How you let us struggle financially while you bought luxuries with our savings? How you accepted his generosity while giving nothing back? Dad wanted to help. Dad wanted you to take care of me after he was gone. But instead of honoring that request, you used his death as an opportunity to take even more from me. More money, more time, more emotional labor." Thelma's mask was starting to slip. "You're being unfair. We never asked you to do anything you didn't want to do. I wanted to do it because I loved you. Because I thought love meant saying yes to everything, giving everything, being everything to everyone. But you never loved me back the same way. That's ridiculous. Of course we love you. No, you love what I do for you. You love having a free babysitter, an emergency bank account, a source of endless emotional support that never expects anything in return. But do you love me, Margaret? The person with needs and feelings and dreams of her own?" Wesley leaned forward, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "Mom, everyone in a family makes sacrifices. That's how families work. Everyone? Tell me about your sacrifices, Wesley. What have you given up for me?" We visit you. We call you. When you need something. You visit when you need babysitting. You call when you need money or advice or someone to solve your problems. But when was the last time you called just to hear my voice? When was the last time you visited just because you missed me? Silence. When was the last time either of you asked how I'm doing and actually waited for an honest answer? More silence. When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? Thelma stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking. This is absurd. We're not here to be lectured by what? By your mother-in-law who's tired of being treated like hired help. By the woman who raised the man you married and never once asked you to prove you were worthy of him. That's enough. Wesley's voice was sharp now, angry. You're out of line. I'm out of line for asking to be treated with respect in my own home. You're out of line for holding the past against us, for punishing us for things that happened years ago. I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. I walked to my front door and opened it wide. I think this conversation is over. We're not leaving until we resolve this, Wesley said, his jaw set in stubborn determination. There's nothing to resolve. I've made my position clear. I will not continue to be your source of free labor and emergency funding. I will not be available on demand for your convenience. I will not sacrifice my well-being for your comfort. So that's it? Thelma's voice was shrill now. You're just going to abandon your family? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply requiring that my family treat me like a person instead of a resource. Wesley stood slowly, his face a mixture of anger and something that might have been fear. Fine. Have it your way. But don't expect us to come crawling back when you realize how lonely you're going to be. Lonely. The threat that had controlled me for so long. Wesley, I said quietly, I've been lonely for years. I was lonely when you forgot my birthday. I was lonely when you were too busy to visit during my flu. I was lonely sitting in this house waiting for phone calls that only came when you needed something. I looked at both of them, these people I'd loved more than my own life, and felt something close to pity. The difference is, now I'm choosing my solitude instead of having loneliness forced on me, and that makes all the difference in the world. They left without another word, Thelma slamming the door behind them with the force of someone who'd never been denied anything she wanted. I stood in my quiet living room, listening to their car pull out of my driveway, and waited for the familiar crushing weight of guilt and regret to settle on my chest. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Pride. Pride in myself for standing up to people who'd been walking over me for years. Pride in finding my voice after so long of being silenced by my own need to be loved. Pride in choosing dignity over desperation. I poured myself a glass of wine, good wine from the bottle I'd bought for myself, and sat in George's chair wearing my coral sweater and his gray cardigan. Well, George, I said to the gathering darkness outside my window, I think I finally figured out how to take care of myself, and for the first time since he'd died, I felt like he would have been proud of me too. 6 months later, I barely recognized the woman I used to be. I was standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, but instead of the familiar weight of obligation pressing on my shoulders, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed: anticipation. Today was pottery class at the community center, followed by lunch with Patricia from book club, and then an evening phone call with my new friend Elena, a widow from Sacramento I'd met through an online support group for women rediscovering themselves after loss. My house had transformed too. Gone were the shrine-like arrangements of family photos that had made me feel like I was living in a museum of my own sacrifices. Instead, my walls displayed artwork I'd chosen because it made me smile. Watercolors of coastal scenes, a vibrant abstract piece that reminded me of sunrise, photographs from my recent trips to the Columbia River Gorge and Mount Hood. The living room furniture was arranged for conversation now, not television watching. Plants filled corners that had once held dusty mementos. My kitchen table, which had served as a staging area for everyone else's emergencies, now held my current novel, a half-finished crossword puzzle, and a small vase of fresh flowers I bought myself every Friday. I'd lost 15 pounds without trying, not from stress or grief, but from the simple act of cooking meals I actually wanted to eat instead of force-feeding myself leftovers from dinners nobody came to share. My skin had color again. My posture was straighter. When I caught my reflection in windows while walking downtown, I sometimes didn't immediately recognize the confident-looking woman staring back at me. The book club had become the anchor of my social life. What started as weekly literary discussions had evolved into genuine friendships with women who saw me as Margaret first, not as someone's mother or grandmother or widow. We went to plays together, explored farmers markets, took day trips to wineries and art galleries. Last month, Joan and I had driven to Seattle for a weekend music festival, giggling like teenagers as we sang along to folk songs in my Honda Civic. My phone rang constantly now, but not with demands and emergencies. Patricia called to share funny stories about her grandchildren's latest adventures. Susan texted photos of books she thought I'd enjoy. Mary invited me to her daughter's art show, not because she needed a babysitter, but because she valued my opinion on creative expression. I'd started volunteering at the local literacy center, teaching adult reading classes on Thursday evenings. There was something profoundly healing about helping people discover their own voices through words, watching their confidence grow as they mastered skills that had once seemed impossible. My students, immigrants learning English, adults who'd dropped out of school decades ago, people rebuilding their lives after addiction or incarceration, reminded me that it's never too late to start over. The financial independence felt intoxicating. For the first time in my adult life, every dollar I spent was my choice. I'd taken a small portion of my savings and booked a cruise to Alaska for next spring, something George and I had always talked about but never done because there was always someone else's need that seemed more urgent. I'd bought a new car, nothing fancy, but reliable and comfortable, with heated seats and a sunroof that made me feel young when I drove with it open. Most surprisingly, I'd started dating. His name was Frank, a 72-year-old retired librarian I'd met at a community lecture about local history. He was gentle and funny, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a laugh that started in his belly and worked its way up until his whole face crinkled with joy. Our first coffee date had lasted 4 hours, conversation flowing as easily as if we'd known each other for years. Frank didn't need anything from me. He had his own home, his own finances, his own rich life filled with volunteer work and hobbies and adult children who actually visited him regularly because they enjoyed his company. What he offered was companionship without obligation, affection without manipulation, the simple pleasure of being valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. We went to museums together, shared quiet dinners at small restaurants, took walks through Portland's beautiful parks while discussing everything from books to politics to the strange liberation of starting over in your 70s. He never pressured me for more than I was ready to give, never made assumptions about my time or availability, never treated my boundaries as inconveniences to be negotiated away. When I told the book club about Frank, the women clapped and cheered like I'd announced winning the lottery. "It's about time," Mrs. Chen said, squeezing my hand. "You deserve to be cherished." Cherished. Such a simple word, but it described something I'd never experienced in all my years of marriage and motherhood. George had loved me, deeply and truly, but even his love had been tangled up with expectation and assumption. Wesley had needed me, but need isn't the same as appreciation. Frank simply enjoyed me, delighted in my company, celebrated my thoughts and opinions as valuable in their own right. The calls from my family had become sporadic and increasingly desperate. Wesley still called occasionally, usually when he was facing some crisis that money could solve, his voice carrying the barely suppressed rage of someone accustomed to getting his way through persistence and emotional manipulation. "Mom, Emma needs a new laptop for school, and Thelma's business is having cash flow problems. We're really struggling here." "I'm sorry to hear that, Wesley. Have you considered a payment plan through the school? Or maybe a used laptop from the computer store?" "We can't afford those options. We need help. You need to adjust your expectations to match your budget. That's what adults do." "I can't believe you're being this cold to your own family." Cold. Because refusing to subsidize their lifestyle choices made me cold. Thelma had tried a different approach, sending Emma to call me directly. My granddaughter's voice was carefully coached, hitting notes of manipulation that broke my heart because they revealed how thoroughly she'd been trained to see me as a resource rather than a person. "Grandma Maggie, I miss you so much. Mom says you don't want to see us anymore because you're angry about something. I don't understand what we did wrong." The guilt had hit me like a physical blow, the old programming kicking in with ruthless efficiency. But I'd learned to recognize manipulation now. even when it came wrapped in the voice of a child I loved. Emma, sweetheart, I miss you too, but I'm not angry with you. I'm setting boundaries with your parents because they've been treating me like a bank account instead of a grandmother. I don't understand. I know you don't, honey, and that's not your fault. But grown-ups sometimes have to make hard choices to protect themselves from being hurt. Mom says you've changed, that you're not the same grandma who used to take care of us. Your mom is right. I'm not the same person. I'm better now, stronger, happier. And someday, when you're older, I hope you'll understand that changing can be a good thing. The conversation had ended with Emma crying, and I'd spent the rest of that day grieving for the relationship that had been poisoned by her parents' sense of entitlement. But I didn't break. I didn't call Wesley to apologize or offer money to make the pain stop. I'd learned the difference between guilt that signals wrongdoing and guilt that signals growth. 3 weeks ago, something unexpected happened. Jake called me directly, not with a scripted request, but with genuine curiosity. Grandma, Dad says you're dating someone. Is that true? It is true. His name is Frank, and he's very kind. Are you happy? The question was so simple, so direct, so unlike anything any member of my family had asked me in years that I actually started crying. Yes, Jake. I'm very happy. Good. You deserve to be happy. 15-year-old Jake, who'd been taught to see me as a resource, had somehow retained enough of his natural empathy to recognize my humanity. We talked for an hour that night about school and friends and his dreams of studying marine biology. For the first time in months, I felt connected to one of my grandchildren not as a provider, but as a person he genuinely enjoyed talking to. The following week, Jake called again, and then again. Our conversations became a weekly tradition, the two of us building a relationship based on mutual affection rather than transactional need. I told him about my pottery class, and he told me about his marine biology research. I shared stories about Frank, and he shared stories about a girl he liked at school. Grandma, he said during one of our calls, I think Mom and Dad were wrong about you. You seem happier now. More, I don't know, more like yourself, more like myself. From the mouth of a 15-year-old came the validation I'd been seeking my entire adult life. Last Tuesday, I did something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. I went to Emma's school play without being invited. I bought a ticket like any other community member, sat in the back of the auditorium, and watched my granddaughter shine on stage as the lead in Our Town. She was magnificent, confident and luminous and fully present in her performance. During intermission, I went to the lobby to buy flowers from the volunteers selling bouquets for the cast. As I waited in line, I overheard Thelma talking to another parent. Emma's so talented, the woman was saying. You must be so proud. We are, Thelma replied. Though I have to say it's been challenging financially. These drama programs require so much. Costumes, private coaching, summer camps. We're doing everything we can to support her dreams. But it's not easy on a single income. Single income. As if Wesley wasn't working. As if they hadn't received thousands of dollars from George's secret account over the years. As if they hadn't saved nearly $50,000 in childcare costs when I provided free babysitting for 2 years. But I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt something closer to pity for people so committed to seeing themselves as victims that they couldn't acknowledge their own privileges. After the play ended, I waited outside the stage door with my bouquet of pink roses. When Emma emerged, still glowing with post-performance adrenaline, she saw me and froze. Grandma Maggie? You were wonderful, I said, offering her the flowers. Absolutely wonderful. She took the bouquet with trembling hands, her eyes filling with tears. You came to my play. Of course I came to your play. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Wesley and Thelma appeared behind her, their faces tight with surprise and something that looked like embarrassment. Mom, Wesley said carefully, we didn't know you were here. I bought a ticket like everyone else. Emma deserved to have her grandmother in the audience. Emma hugged me then, fierce and desperate, whispering, I missed you so much, into my ear. I held her close, breathing in the scent of stage makeup and teenage shampoo, remembering why I'd fought so hard to become someone worthy of this moment. I missed you too, sweetheart, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. As I drove home that night, Frank waiting for me with a pot of tea and stories about his day, I realized something profound. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn love through sacrifice and service. But the love I'd finally found, with Frank, with my book club friends, with Jake, even with Emma in that brief, honest embrace, was love I'd received simply by being myself. For the first time in 78 years, I was enough exactly as I was. And tomorrow, I was going to wake up curious about what new adventures that enoughness might bring. 1 year later, I was sitting on the deck of an Alaskan cruise ship, watching glaciers calve into the sea, while Frank read passages from a nature guide about the wildlife we might spot. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of adventure that George and I had only dreamed about but never allowed ourselves to experience. "Listen to this," Frank said, his voice filled with the wonder that made me fall for him all over again every day. "Those orcas we saw yesterday can live up to 90 years. Imagine all the changes they witness in their lifetimes. 90 years. I thought about the changes I'd witnessed in just my own 79 years, but more importantly, the changes I'd made in the past 12 months. How different life looked when you stopped asking, 'What do they need from me?' and started asking, 'What do I need for myself?'" The woman who used to empty her savings account for other people's emergencies was now sipping champagne at 10 a.m. because she was on vacation and felt like celebrating another gorgeous day of being alive. The woman who used to apologize for taking up space was now claiming her seat at the captain's table, charming fellow passengers with stories and laughter. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Grandma, I got accepted to Oregon State's marine biology program. Early admission. Can't wait to tell you all about it when you get back." I showed Frank the message, my heart swelling with pride for the grandson who'd chosen to see me as a person worth knowing rather than a bank account worth draining. "You must be so proud," Frank said, squeezing my hand. "I am. And you know what? He earned this entirely on his own merit. No grandmother's money smoothing the way, no secret payments from his grandfather. Just his own hard work and intelligence. Jake had visited me twice since the school play, each time without his parents, choosing to build a relationship with me that existed outside their dysfunction. He'd shown me his marine biology research, listened to my stories about Frank and the book club, helped me set up the new laptop I'd bought for myself. Our conversations were easy and genuine, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Emma had been slower to reach out, still caught between her parents' resentment and her own confused feelings about my transformation. But last month, she'd called me directly, her voice small and uncertain. "Grandma Maggie, I've been thinking about what you said. About grown-ups making hard choices to protect themselves. I think maybe I understand now." "What do you understand, sweetheart? That loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you, even if they're family." The wisdom in her 15-year-old voice had taken my breath away. Somehow, despite her parents' attempts to paint me as the villain in their family story, Emma was beginning to understand that boundaries weren't walls designed to keep people out. They were bridges built to let the right people in on the right terms. Wesley and Thelma had largely disappeared from my life, their absence filled so completely by genuine relationships that I rarely missed the drama they'd brought to my days. Occasionally, I heard updates through Jake or community gossip. Thelma's business was struggling. Wesley was stressed about money. They'd had to downsize their house when they couldn't afford the mortgage payments without my financial backup. I felt sympathy for their struggles, but not guilt, not responsibility. They were adults who'd made choices, and those choices had consequences that belonged to them, not to me. The most surprising development had been my relationship with my own extended family. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years began reaching out after Jake mentioned my new life on social media. My late sister's daughter, Carol, drove down from Seattle to visit, amazed by the transformation she found. "Aunt Maggie, you seem like a completely different person," she'd said, sitting in my sunny living room with its new furniture and cheerful colors. "You're so vibrant, so present." "I am different," I'd told her. "I'm who I was always meant to be, before I learned to shrink myself to fit other people's convenience." Carol had stayed for 3 days, and we'd talked about everything. Our childhoods, our marriages, our children, our dreams for the future. She'd known my mother, her grandmother, and told me stories I'd never heard about the strong, independent woman who'd raised me before arthritis and age had slowed her down. She would be so proud of you, Carol had said as she prepared to leave. She always worried that you gave too much of yourself away. She used to say you had a servant's heart but needed to learn a queen's boundaries. A queen's boundaries. I'd carried those words with me to Alaska, wearing them like armor against any lingering guilt about the choices I'd made. The cruise was everything George and I had imagined and more. Frank and I spent our days exploring port cities, our evenings dancing to the ship's orchestra, our nights talking on the balcony about everything and nothing. We'd booked separate cabins, maintaining the careful independence that made our relationship feel like a choice rather than a necessity. "You know what I love most about you?" Frank had said one evening as we watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of pink and gold. "What's that? You're complete all by yourself. You don't need me to make you whole or happy or interesting. You just allow me to be part of your already beautiful life." Allow. Such a different word than need or require or demand. Frank understood that the best relationships were composed of two people who chose each other daily, not two people trapped together by obligation or desperation. On our last night aboard the ship, I did something I'd been putting off for months. I called Wesley. He answered on the third ring, his voice guarded and suspicious. "Mom?" "Hello, Wesley. I'm calling from Alaska." "Alaska? I'm on a cruise. Remember how your father and I always talked about visiting Alaska? Well, I finally did it." Silence. Then, "You went to Alaska, by yourself?" "With a friend. A very dear friend named Frank." More silence. I could hear the television in the background, the ordinary sounds of domestic life continuing around his confusion. "Mom, we've been thinking about you. Missing you. Missing me. Or missing what I used to provide for them. I've been thinking about you too, Wesley. And I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you, and I always will." Then why? "But love isn't the same as enabling. Love isn't the same as sacrificing myself until there's nothing left. Love isn't the same as saying yes to everything and no to nothing. I don't understand what you want from us. I don't want anything from you, Wesley. That's the point. I want something for you. I want you to be happy and healthy and successful. But I want those things for you to achieve on your own, through your own efforts and choices. And what about family? What about helping each other? Help is a gift freely given and gratefully received. What you were asking for wasn't help. It was systematic financial and emotional support that you felt entitled to without reciprocation." I could hear him breathing, thinking, perhaps recognizing the truth in what I was saying for the first time. "So what now?" he asked finally. "Now you live your life, and I live mine. If you want a relationship with me, a real relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection, I'm open to that. But it has to be different. It has to be honest." "I don't know how to do that." "Neither did I admitted. "I had to learn, and it was the best education I ever gave myself." We talked for 20 more minutes, carefully and honestly, like two adults negotiating a new arrangement rather than a mother and son, trapped in old patterns of resentment and exploitation. By the end of the call, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. Maybe hope, maybe possibility, maybe just the simple acknowledgement that we were both different people than we'd been a year ago. The next morning, as Frank and I disembarked in Seattle, I felt the familiar flutter of anticipation that had become my constant companion since I'd learned to live for myself instead of through others. We had plans to explore the city for 2 days before flying back to Portland, where my book club was planning a welcome-back dinner, and Jake was waiting to share more details about his college acceptance. "What are you thinking about?" Frank asked as we stood on the dock, surrounded by our luggage and fellow passengers saying goodbye to new friends. "I'm thinking about time," I said. "About how I spent the first 78 years of my life believing that love meant disappearing, and how I've spent this past year learning that love actually means showing up. As yourself, for yourself, with yourself. And I'm thinking about how much time I have left, and how I want to spend every single day of it choosing my own joy." As we climbed into the taxi that would take us to our Seattle hotel, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window reflection. The woman looking back at me was unrecognizable from the ghost who used to haunt her own house. waiting for crumbs of attention from people who saw her as invisible. This woman had silver hair that caught the light, eyes that sparkled with plans and possibilities, hands that reached for what she wanted instead of constantly giving away what she had. This woman took up space deliberately, spoke her mind clearly, loved fiercely, but not desperately. This woman was me. Finally, completely, unapologetically me. I'd learned something that I wish I'd known at 30, or 40, or 50. You teach people how to treat you, and if you teach them that your needs don't matter, that your boundaries are negotiable, that your love is a renewable resource they can drain without consequence, then that's exactly how they'll treat you. But it's never too late to start teaching different lessons. It's never too late to show the people in your life, and yourself, that you deserve to be valued, respected, and loved not for what you can provide, but for who you are. The most radical thing a woman can do, especially as she ages, is to insist on her own worth, to choose her own happiness, to build a life that serves her spirit instead of everyone else's convenience. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, if it disrupts their plans and expectations, if it forces them to examine their own behavior and choices, well, that's not your problem to solve anymore. Have you ever found yourself disappearing into other people's needs until you couldn't remember what you wanted for yourself? Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot you deserved to be loved back just as fiercely? Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if this message resonated with you, if you see yourself in my journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because somewhere out there is another person who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself, and your support helps this message reach them. Remember, you are not too old to start over. You are not too set in your ways to change. You are not responsible for other people's happiness at the expense of your own. You are enough. You have always been enough, and you deserve a life that celebrates that truth every single day.